Hey guys, welcome to another kind of behind the scenes of how I edit an episode of Sonic Stop Motion Adventures, still episode 24. Shooting this right after, or recording this right after the Blink tutorial, so of course the episode is out, but for right now it is not. So, I've talked about this before in another tutorial, but it was not as, I don't think it was as clear. I've changed how I do it, and I was also not recording with a screen recorder, I was recording with a camera pointed at the desktop because I couldn't get it figured out back then, but now I can, and it's all good. So, what am I talking about here? So, I'm going to talk about color correction, or as I call it, tinting. Color correction is used on pretty much every movie you see ever, because it's very rare to shoot a scene and it look perfect. I'm not positive if there are any movies that don't use it at all. I'm sure there have been. But right here, I'm going to split this because I already tinted it. So this is how the frame looks originally. Let me do it best full. That's how the frame looks, how I took it. And you know what? That actually is a very good looking frame. This was a nice shoot, and I was really happy with how all the lighting came out and everything. The colors looked nice, but it's still like I got to take it one step further. So this is how it looks completed. And it's a lot easier to tell in the actual episode because you're looking at a preview window right here and not the actual rendered thing. In fact, the preview likes to make it look a little tad bit darker than it actually is and how it will actually come out rendered. I don't know why. Vegas is just like that, and that's fine. I like to render every time I tint to make sure it looks good in MP4 anyway. Okay, so this is how the frame looks when I took it. And when I color correct, sometimes I don't even correct the actual color. Most of the time I do. But like I said, I call it tinting just to make it easier. Sounds cooler, I think. Because color correction implies that I'm only changing the color. Tinting kind of implies I'm changing other things. Well, you know, lighting and stuff. But okay, so that's the original. And this is the original, and that's the edited version. So what do I do to make them look good? So I have filter packages, which are basically a bunch of effects in one, and you can add them to, you know, frames or video or whatever. So I've gone through, as you can see, a couple iterations of this. I call it the usual because I use it for everything in a stop motion episode. So this like flashback effects I have in the TV effects, blue blur. I don't even know what that is. Anyway, so the usual was the very first one I started with, and I can't remember when I actually started tinting, but that was brightness, contrast, sharpen, color corrector, and saturation adjust. Let me show you why color corrector itself isn't actually the best thing to use. So you get these three kind of color wheels. You get a low, a mid, and a high, or a medium, rather. What I would do is always drag the medium down to, like, be blue. And this frame itself, like I said, this is a very good frame. I'm very happy with it. Even like that, it doesn't look terrible, but I would not do it this way now. Basically, what I'm doing in color correction most of the time is I will take shots that I took from my shooting sessions and make the blue a little more prominent and give it a little more blue in color corrector. And I do that because I use natural lighting, so naturally the sunlight is going to give kind of a yellowish tint to a lot of things. And I've gotten used to this process, and I would be tinting either way, so it's not really as bad as it might sound. So this was the one I did first. I've also learned brightness contrast is not the best thing to use either, because it can be useful for like very subtle adjustments. I actually still have it in my updated one because even if I'll completely edit a sequence, you know, let's say, you know, this sequence is supposed to have, thanks Vegas for auto-saving at the most opportune time. If I'm editing a sequence and I'm tinting it, what I do is, you know, I make one frame like this. I'll make wow, that's quite a difference. I'll make this frame how I want it to look. I'll copy it, and then I'll paste event attributes to all the frames in the sequence. But sometimes you'll get a frame that's a little bit darker or a little bit lighter. So it's good to have brightness contrast there just to make slight adjustments. But it's not good for big things. And that's what I've come to learn. And I talked about brightness contrast last time, like when I used it. But I don't use it primarily anymore. Sharpen is a really great effect to use. I usually hover around 297 to 305-ish area. It just makes the picture pop a little more. If you already have a really awesome camera that shoots really crisp shots, you probably don't need to worry about sharpen. I'm just telling you what I do, because I have a good camera, but it's not the best. I do like it, though. And I probably won't be upgrading for the rest of the show. If I do get a new camera, it'll be after SSMA is done and over with. Anyway, unless something happens to this one, knock on wood. So, that's brightness contrast, sharpen, color corrector, and then saturation adjust. I like to use this just to make the color. I usually just adjust the low, just to make the, see if you drag it all the way, that's what it does. If you drag it all the way back, that's what it does. That actually looked kind of neat, but shitty. So I usually just drag it up a little bit, and that's the only slider I adjust here is the low saturation. I make it a little more prominent, just to make the colors a little more poppin', the blues pop a little more, stuff like that. Okay, so that's what I used to do. Now, I do, actually I had one in between. I had the usual Mark II, which was the same, but with, let's actually get rid of those. And then this one was the same with, what the hell? Oh yeah, with color balance, but I'll talk about that in a second. See, brightness contrast is still the same. Everything's still the same except this switched with color corrector. Color balance is the more opportune one to use, at least for my use. And now I have the usual Mark III, which is levels, brightness contrast, color balance, sharpen, and saturation adjust. It's a lot. So let's talk about this one. This is how I do it. So this is how, these are all the effects I use to get from this frame to this frame. And it might seem like a slight adjustment, but it does go a long way, I think. Especially when you do it for the whole episode, because then you're kind of creating your own lighting in a sense. But it's best to get as close as you can in shooting, but you know, there's only so much that's humanly possible when you're using sunlight. So, okay, first I'll usually sharpen it to about, you know, about there. Anywhere from 290 to 3. I usually don't go over because then it looks too sharp, and you don't want it to look like outrageously like crisp, because then it's like weird. Then I'll raise the saturation just a little bit, and then color balance is the big one. That I switched color balance for color corrector because it's way better and it's a lot easier. At least for me, because my purpose is I just want to make the blues stand out a little more and make it a little more of a bluish tint. And all I gotta do is go to the slider that's blue and then just drag it a little tiny bit over it, because if I do it too much then it's gonna look like that. I don't want it to look like that. So I just drag it over a tiny bit, kinda like that. And then that settles on that. And then I usually don't touch brightness contrast in the actual, like, when I'm editing one frame to get the look I want. I'll usually only touch it if I need to touch up, like, these frames over here, make them just like a twinge brighter or darker, and I need to do that sometimes. Not all the time, though. So then levels. Levels is the effect you want to use instead of brightness contrast primarily, because it makes it look much more natural, it's a lot easier, and it doesn't go extreme like brightness, because if I go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, that's already quite the difference. You know, if I keep going, it just gets extreme. So let's put that back to 0. Sometimes I will touch on brightness contrast when I'm getting the look down initially, but not all the time. In fact, more often than not, I don't. Okay, so input end, if you drag this down, it gets brighter. If you drag output end down, it gets darker. And then there's output start and input start. I usually don't touch those because they're usually fine. But in this instance, I want to... So this is the final look, and this is what I have now. It's a little more blue. It's not exact, but I'm just kind of showing you what I do usually. So what I would do here is I would probably... Can you save already? Thank you. I would probably... Actually, it's a little too blue, so probably drag that back. And then I would drag output end just a tiny bit down, make it a little darker, and, well, actually, this one's much brighter. Oh, that's right. For Sonic's house scene, I wanted to kind of convey that it's morning, so I made this a little brighter than I usually would. I don't know if you can tell, but if this was normal day, this is probably what it would look like. It's a little brighter because it's the morning. So yeah, that's basically what I do. Let me just delete this thing and get the original, or the final one back. And then I do it for all frames in the animation, just like so. You can see it's the same look. And this is an episode with a lot of different lightings, I think. There's, you know, there's normal lighting in, well, actually, let's just start from Scene 1. I mean, Scene 1 is using lamps in the Radnick apartment. Very yellow, very kind of, this is what a room is lit like. And then we have the night lighting. Well, not that. We have the night lighting with Knuckles and Shadow. In fact, you can see I didn't even tint these at all. Some of these sequences in the night scene didn't need to be tinted. But yeah, so this is the night lighting for episode 24. And the way I did this is I just took the lamps that I usually shoot with and put a blue piece of tissue paper in front of it. In fact, I think I only shot with one lamp here. I usually shoot with two, but I actually just shot with one and had that blue tissue paper in front of it. And that's what kind of gave it this blue tint. I'm sure I could have done this digitally, but I don't think it would look as good. And you can see I actually did, in fact, tint these. Let's see what it looked like. It was a very subtle adjustment. I only used sharpen and levels. So, yeah, it's really, really subtle, but there's a difference there. Because I still needed to sharpen up the image, make shadow pop a little bit. So yeah, that's the night lighting. And then we have kind of the average lighting of Sonic Stop Motion Adventures, which is, you can see in Tails' lab. Very crisp, the colors all pop. It's a little bit yellow, but I tone it down with blue. So this is kind of the normal look you see in the show usually. And then we have the city coming up over here, where things are a little bit more yellow than what they were in Tails' place, because you can see comparing shots like this to this. It's a little more yellow and bright. And then we have, what's next? Of course, Sonic's Nightmare sequence, which is only, this was all, let me talk about this for a second. This was all PNGs that I cut out. This took forever to do. If I learned to mask, I probably could have done it faster, but I didn't want to do that. I'm stubborn. So, this was all PNGs, but you can see not a lot of lighting changes. I did on this sequence right here, only because it was a little dim. So we have that lighting, and then we have Sonic's room lighting, Sonic's house lighting, rather, for when it's kind of morning, and then I have the jail cell lighting. This is actually where I am stopped on tinting right now. I still have all of from here to go. But tinting is usually pretty fast, and it's good because you can listen to music or watch something while you do it. Anyway, that's my long spiel about lighting in Sonic Stop Motion Adventures. A lot of people would rather use lamps, like my good buddy, Lifeline the Hedgehog, AJ. He uses lamps for all of his shooting. And I don't. I only use it when I need to or I want to convey a sort of light. I know for him, he couldn't get away with natural light because he lives in New York on a building, and he has like one window in his room, and he doesn't have like nearly as much sunlight come in as I do. I shoot downstairs with this big backyard window where I get a lot of sunlight. So he uses lamps because he has to. I don't think using lamps for the whole thing looks as good as it could, though, because then it all kind of looks like the same time of day, or like it's in purgatory, like everything looks the same, you know? You can never really convey, you know, what time it is. And I don't know if I do an amazing job of that in my show, but I try, like I strictly convey that, you know, this scene over here, oh, back there, is at night, and then the, you know, the jail cell is kind of, it's kind of like shut in from everything else. So there's like a, this is unedited, by the way. What is this? Oh yeah, it's the flashback. Oh yeah, so flashback lighting is I actually did a few things for flashback lighting. This is going just on and on, but I keep finding things to talk about. So I sharpened it like normal. I actually added some light rays to give it a bit of a ghosty effect. I adjusted the saturation, but then I also took black and white and took it just under halfway to give it a faded look. And that's how I did the... Oh, and I also amped up the brightness. So that's how I did the flashback. Anyway, oh man, I just keep talking and talking. So that's how I do lighting in Sonic Stop Motion Adventures. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.